Okay, we're okay.
Good. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this afternoon's executive board meeting. If we could go through the formalities before we start discussing the papers. Item 1, please.
Thanks, Chair. Appeals. To confirm, Chair, no appeals have been received for today's meeting.
Item 2.
Exempt information. Yes, Chair. Should the board be agreeable, then appendices 2 and 3 to item 10, which is the accelerated capital receipts and estate rationalisation report, have been designated as being exempt from publication and will be considered in private at the conclusion of the public meeting.
Okay. What do we think?
Oh, sorry, I think someone needs to be on mute. Item 3.
Thanks, Chair. Late items. With your agreement, a report entitled Update on the Coronavirus Pandemic Response and Recovery Plan has been circulated to board members for consideration as agenda item 18, and also not a formal late item as such, but members have received an addendum to item 6, financial health monitoring, which provides updated information and a revised set of recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Item 4, do any members have any declaration to make around concerning disclosable pecuniary interests? No, I take silence as a no. Item 5, can we confirm the minutes before us are a correct record of the minutes from the meeting on the 21st of October? Thank you. We move on then to the resources portfolio, and can I ask Councillor James Lewis to introduce his papers, please?
Thank you, Chair. And the first paper is the paper that Gerard referred to as the one with the addendum, which includes amended recommendations. This is the financial health monitoring for month 6, which records the progress we are making towards managing this year's budget 2020-2021. The paper sets out the position for month 6 in terms of where we see the council's financial position, and there is a large amount of information in there about where we're in that is available for members. I will mainly speak to the information in the addendum, which reflects that since the papers were published, and having assessed the situation, including tranche 4 of government funding we received, we are in a position now where we can, with sole use of our own resources, balance the budget for 2021. We no longer are in a position where we require support from national government to do so. And as the paper against the addendum sets out, we will use our existing resources to balance a budget. I think this is a positive. I think it shows one of our strengths has always been our ability to manage a budget without use of other resources during a year. Clearly, there's no way this can be underlined more. Managing a budget during a period of COVID has been very difficult. However, I am pleased we've got to a position where, like I say, we no longer require assistance from the government or to be in a position beyond the changes set out in the addendum to need external support to manage the budget this year. I'm going to ask, Chair, with your permission, if Victoria Bradshaw could say some more about the content of the paper as well, please.
Yeah, that's fine. Victoria, would you like to comment, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think we've been in a lot of discussions with MHCLG and our external auditors, and we feel that this position now is where we can manage for the current financial year. As Councillor Lewis has said, it's taken a lot of work and diligence by all directors and their teams to get to this position, and also members. And we feel that we can balance the budget for this year. Next year will be challenging, and that we will need to make sure that we manage the budgets, as we have done in previous years, very tightly, and have controls in place to make sure that we take corrective action in a timely fashion. But I think that we should see this as a positive outcome about how we've managed this situation that's unprecedented throughout the year. And that's all I wanted to say, Councillor Blake. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just of course to reassure board members that we're continuing to work with all of our national partners and with government. Conversations inevitably are ongoing given the uncertainty of the months ahead, and we don't know yet how successful the vaccine is going to be in enabling us to get back to some sort of normality, what impact that will have on our income projections for the year ahead. All of these matters will continue to be closely monitored. But again, I'd like to thank you for the work that yourself and officers have done in very, very difficult times. It isn't an easy situation, and will continue to be challenging for many months ahead. Councillor Carter, would you like to come in at this point?
Yes, I would, please. Let's begin by adding my thanks to the finance team and indeed all the other directorates for the work they've done in attempting to get us to a point where we've a balanced budget for this financial year. It's not been without its problems, but it was helpful that we got the extra 20 million from the government in October, but it still left us with this 30 million gap, and the proposition to capitalise, which appeared for a while to be perhaps the only option before us, would have been, everything has its downside, and whilst capitalisation or permission to capitalise from the government would have got us out of the hole, all it would have done is to put off the evil day, because effectively it's another 30 million of borrowing, which this council can ill afford. So, and furthermore, I think in the light of what's happened in Croydon, and will happen, I think, in other local authorities, there would have been strings attached from the government, which quite understandably, I have to say. And if you can sort your own house out, it's far better. However, I make this point, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And what's missing in this addendum is the downside of what we're doing. And let me make it clear, it's infinitely preferable to do what is proposed here and to use this additional reserve, which has been pretty much ignored throughout previous discussions. And I'm not sure, it isn't made very clear where this is actually coming from. And I will leave it to the answer to find out how much of that information can be shared. However, we know it exists, and it's an extra 25 million, and with the other add-ons gets us to a balanced budget situation. However, by using this, of course, there is a downside, and the downside will be that there will be an additional cost every year because we've used this reserve. And I think for the sake of completeness, as I say, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and there is a cost to the council taxpayers of doing what's proposed here. And I'd like to know what that cost is from Victoria, please.
Okay, Victoria, do you want to come back, or Neil? Which
I can come back, Councillor Blake, if that's okay. Thank you. The reserve that we're currently using is what we'd agreed with the external auditors that we would change the accounting treatment for, is around a prepayment that we'd been accounting for on Miriam, to do with Miriam House. And this was where we made an investment a couple of years ago to prepay some of the lease charges over a number of years. We've reviewed how we've accounted for that in the accounts and looked at how the town centre securities have also accounted for that and recognised that in hindsight it was a reduction in the value of the investment and therefore should be a reserve. And so in the 2019-20 accounts, that will be amended and shown as a reserve. The consequence of using that reserve is that we will have to make good the payments, the annual rental, the lease payments for that, which is about just over £1 million a year. And we will do that over the period through the revenue budget. However, that does mean that we don't have to pay the borrowing costs that we would have had to have incurred if we'd have done the capitalisation. So really, it's ourselves borrowing from the reserves and funding the lease payments over a longer period. And I think that's the action that a lot of authorities are having to take when they use the reserves that have been set up for a specific purpose. Will have to repay them over a lifetime. And that's how we're balancing the position for this financial year. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Hartle, do you want to come back?
Yes, please. I mean, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. It underlines the fact that we'll be making a further £1 million payment a year out of the revenue budget. So as I say, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Nevertheless, it is much the lesser of the evils that faced us. So I'm in support of it. But I think it's right that we do make everybody aware, particularly people, residents, that there is a consequence to this, as well as it being good news.
Absolutely, I think transparency is really vital. So thank you for that. Thank you for the explanation, Victoria. Councillor Galton, do you want to comment on this item?
Thanks, Chair. I have no problems at all with our finance team being creative in identifying ways of making sure that our public spending is supported, especially having to work in a vacuum in terms of understanding what the central support is going to be before the settlement is agreed at the end of November. However, I'm always obsessed in a children's services manner with the council still thinking, well, in this situation, we should really be thinking about invest to save functions. And one of the things which is most disconcerting, I think, out of this financial management paper is, once again, the area around children's services and looked after children, in that our looked after children numbers are going down, which you would think was a positive thing, but our costs are going up. And it's because we're sending a large proportion of our young children out of the city to external residential accommodation, which is comparatively more expensive. And I'm not sure if it's in this paper or whether it's in one of the concurrent papers. Interestingly, it talks about how there is inflation in this sector, where we're expecting those costs to go up even further when we're charged by outside contractors. And when I inquired, it was because they were complaining that their facilities have under occupancy and that we would therefore need to help them meet their business cost needs, because our children represented a far higher proportion of the low numbers that they had in their accommodation, which implies that other authorities are not making the same kind of placements as we are. And sorry if that's a long introduction, but I'm just wondering, because each month we do get budget proposals coming forward, would this overspend which is identified here be reflected in future months in those budget proposals? And will the council be looking at this new pressure in terms of cost inflation for outside residential placements to finally bite the bullet and and build some more of our own accommodation so that children can be kept within the authority as is endorsed by the Children's Commissioner.
Thank you. Tim, would you like to answer that specific point if you are able?
Thank you. Yeah, we have experienced some cost inflation on external residential placement costs and independent foster agency costs. During the course of the year, we've seen an increase of about 5.3% in IFA costs. So the actual charge from providers has gone up to about £850 from a budgeted £805. And the increase in external residential costs is even greater. It's about 7.5%. So the actual weekly cost has increased to about 4,300. Most of those increases are because of staffing requirements to cover the COVID-related sickness, and also the cost of PPE equipment with some of those external residential providers. In the budget strategy, we include a figure for demand and demography and in inflation, and we've accounted for inflation in future years' costs. And I'll have to review the inflation element based on the experience of this year. But so far it's factored into the projections that we've got for next year. And we will seek to work with those providers to bring those costs back in line with the rates that we've budgeted for this year.
Tim, can you just clarify, it isn't just Leeds that's having to deal with this situation, it's a national issue that has been highlighted very, very recently by the Children's Commissioner?
Yes, thank you, Leader. From our conversations with other authorities, they're all experiencing similar cost pressures on external residential and independent fostering agency payments.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Can I bring Tom in? Oh, sorry, Councillor Cassidy, do you want to come in on this particular point? Or is it another one?
It's another one.
Okay. Do you want to go first and then I'll bring Tom in?
Okay, fine. Yes, I wonder if Victoria can tell me what the projected interest payments on our debts will be in this financial year. And I also, just on the point of inflation, there's a much wider point, I'm afraid, than Councillor Galton highlighted, although that in itself is serious. And that's the inflationary pressures that are going to be coming to bear in the next financial year. And perhaps we can touch on that paper.
Okay, thank you. Victoria, could you just pick those 2 points up and then I'll come on to Tom.
Could I send the information to Councillor Carter outside the meeting? Would that be okay on the interest amounts that we're paying in addition to MRP?
Yes, he's saying yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is that go for the inflation as well, generally?
I can do both for the interest and the inflation that's assumed in the medium term, in this year and in the medium term financial strategy.
Okay, that seems to be meeting.
Yes, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Tom.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate the thanks to the team across the whole council and finance in particular for coming to this position, and just to re-emphasise again, probably for those who aren't familiar with this, that how difficult this has been and continues to be for the council. I do think there's definitely as we've seen, very welcome support coming from the Treasury 4 times this year, and the last one in particular I think was aimed at councils like ours that were in recognition of the difficulties that have been experienced. However, it hasn't filled the gap completely, and we've had to take some quite radical action to let some very experienced members of staff leave to make some service changes that and to bring forward a budget for next year, which is an even bigger mountain to climb, and start developing that as well. And I think the one thing I would say about the Treasury's policy so far, after having praised part of it, is to say that the thing that I would really like them to see in the spending review is to give us the ability to do what the rest of government is able to do in spreading unpaid business rates, council tax, etc., over future years. I think it's very, very hard to experience something like this COVID pandemic and expect to have to correct the wrongs of it in 18 months. And so I think that's the bit of the spending review. There'll be, political debates to have about whether the amounts are enough. But as a principle, I think cross-party, I think the LGA have made this point cross-party, and I think we've benefited from cross-party interventions from this council in the past. That's the key point for me, because if we could get some help on that, then it's that last bit of the gap that's the really, really difficult bit to bridge, and the one that will be hardest and to do, particularly in a single year. So I just wanted to, I think that's important context for the discussion that we've just had, and obviously discussions that you'll continue to have coming up to the budget next year.
Could I suggest that we draft a letter to go into Treasury along those lines and see if we can get cross-party support to sign it to go in? Would that be something that Councillor Carter and Galton would be interested in?
I'm happy to make my position very clear, and I agree with the Chief Exec that we should spread it. I'm not sure, my views on letters. We've sent so many in the past. You suspect some of them are made into paper aeroplanes. Quite understandably, in my view. But unfortunately, this is a very important one, and I would prefer that we made our own comments through the appropriate channels, which I'm more than happy to do, because I agree entirely with Tom. As a principle, to be able to spread that loss at the collection over a period of time is I think, a principle I would support. Well, I would support it.
Okay. Catherine, would you like to answer? Sorry, is he there? Councillor Galton?
Yes, sorry.
Would you be interested in looking at?
Oh yeah, sorry, Chair. I thought you'd seen me enthusiastically nodding.
Sorry, you were.
So yes, happy to support that. Yeah.
You're on a different screen. Apologies.
I thought he was completing washing your car, Judith.
Sorry?
I thought he was completing washing your car. That's what we all think he does in his spare time these days.
Gosh, that's a bit deep for a Wednesday afternoon. Right.
Very much to the point, I would suggest.
Can I note, if we could note those comments in the recommendations, and could I ask everyone if they are happy to sign up to the recommendations in the report? And if we are, could we move on to your next paper, Councillor Lewis, please?
Thank you, Leader. The next paper is the capital programme update, and the main request in the recommendations is approving the 9.55 million of grants and contributions, which will be injected into the capital programme set out in point 4. I don't think there's a lot more that needs to be said in introduction to the paper than that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carter, any comments on item 7?
Hang on, I'm here. Could you just clarify for me, what has the capital programme increased by between 2014-15 and now? and how much of that is to be paid for by borrowing?
Okay, Victoria, can you?
I haven't got that information to hand, Councillor Blake. I'll have to for 2014. I'll provide that information again to Councillor Carter if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, fine.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Galton.
No comments, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can we approve the recommendations of the paper and move on to your next paper, please?
Thank you, Leader. Item 8 is a Treasury Management Strategy update, and the recommendation is that we note the update. I don't know if there's, again, much more that needs to be said in terms of introduction to this paper.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carter. Is Councillor Carter, can you join us?
I'll have a point to raise on this, but I think it may be better brought up on a later paper, so I'll leave it for the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galton?
No questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can we approve the recommendations for item 8 and move on to item 9?
Thank you, Councillor Blake. Item 9 is the third paper we've received at Executive Board, setting out budget savings proposals for the next financial year, year 21-22, in advance of producing a draft budget which will come to the next Executive Board. As we've talked about at previous Executive Boards, but I will repeat it at this one, so we're very clear about this. The expectation is at this stage is that we will need to make budget savings of £118.8 million for year 21-22. Given the scale, of these savings, and also reflecting the fact, and I refer back to our discussion on item 6, financial health monitoring. We are in very uncertain times overall, given we don't know how long the impact of COVID will be. Nobody has a crystal ball to identify that. And also, again, as we discussed on item 6, we need to be very clear that the budget position we put forward for 21-22 is, sorry, for 21-22 is a deliverable budget, given the way we've dealt with pressures in this year's budget, and we know next year is going to be no easier. We do need to make sure that any savings proposed are achievable during the year. So therefore, items that require consultation to establish their validity, we are bringing forward prior to setting the budget, and there are a number of those proposals set out in this budget paper. Again, this is, to use the old cliche, one piece of a jigsaw towards setting a budget. And like I say, it will start some consultations, which means that we can have assurance about proposals that require consultation are actually have been through that consultation before we include them in the budget plan for next year. And I'll leave my opening comments there, Leader.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Carter.
Yes, thank you. At this point, first of all, I shall not be voting in favour of this, or indeed any of the other financial papers so far, reserving my position until we put our alternative budget proposals at the budget meeting of council. That said, this paper narrows the funding gap from the 118 or whatever it was to 60. But some of the proposals, even going out to consultation, quite frankly, are staggering. And I particularly want to refer to I could refer to them all at length, but there's another time and another place to do that if these remain there. And I suspect there will be significant comments through the consultation process. But I really can't understand on the neighbourhood networks that the proposed saving, you're going out to consultation on 502,000. The neighbourhood networks, along with our in-house provision and our staff in adult social care, have done an amazing job through the pandemic in circumstances nobody could possibly have envisaged. And to even suggest this at this stage seems to me like cutting off your nose to spite your face. These neighbourhood networks have been invaluable, and the council, to give it credit, has funded them well, and they have done an exceptional job. And COVID is going to be with us for some considerable time, and support for neighbourhood networks and the work they do in the community is essential. I would have thought, and I will, if challenged, identify where you could get the money from here and now, but this shouldn't be included. And also, I want to make a point generally about the reviews that are being conducted into all sorts of other areas. For example, bowling greens. The age profile of bowling greens is, shall we say, late middle age. They provide a huge outlet and resource for exercise for people. And for the sort of money that you're proposing to save, other areas can and will be identified that mean we don't have to go ahead with this sort of thing. When we talk about people having active lifestyles, we should talk about people of all age groups. And increasingly, when I look at the savings you're proposing on things like repairs of footpaths, the fact that we've not used any of the active travel money to make sure that rights of way are kept in a better state than they currently are. And then I see suggestions like this. Seems to me you're a one-trick pony. Get on your bike, and if you can't, too bad. I'm sorry, that's not good enough.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure you particularly want to come back on that, Councillor Lewis. Just absorb.
I'll listen carefully to what Councillor Carter said.
Thank you. Councillor Galton.
Thanks, Chair. Likewise to Councillor Carter, I'll also be reserving my position because obviously we'll have our own alternative budget proposals. In terms of the context of how these budget decisions are being made, I will say that I am impressed that the council is bringing forward with such transparency the areas that they are looking at. So that's my positive input there. But I have to say there is some great differential in terms of how the council is demonstrating, where they haven't only identified the areas where cuts can be made, but they are also making meaningful thinking time available to try and reduce as much as possible the impact of those cuts and to try and reimagine that surface so that outcomes are enhanced as much as possible during the process. So although there are plenty of areas where I would disagree with where adult social care is going and adult services, you can't fault actually the way that they are identifying and giving a narrative to the context of what they hope to achieve. As I said, we don't agree with all the things that they want to achieve, and we will be opposing them on a local way. But at least people know.
Unbelievable.
At least people know what the council is intending to do. A lot of the other departments that are bringing proposals forward, they are very short on detail, and they don't show any of the same kind of thinking behind them. And I would like to see, as time goes by, that same level of thought is delivered by those departments. And there's another aspect of the paper as well, which I thought was interesting, which was that it mentions that different directors are offering challenge to their colleagues when they are formulating their budget reduction proposals. And I would like to feel assurance that the chief executive is monitoring the performance of that challenge, because I'm not seeing any great difference in approach from the different departments so far in terms of what they are offering in terms of their proposals for budgets. And going back to my earlier comments about children's services in the financial management section, there are some points in this budget programme which are about where different departments are putting in some money to recognise different ways of working, and where they are putting in invest to save. So it's not all about what can they take out of the system, it's how can they reimagine the system going forward. And I haven't seen any of that, for instance, coming from children's services in terms of the pressures that they've got on their current budget and historically before COVID even hit. So on those general comments, that's where I'm going. And in terms of Councillor Carter, I heard him laughing in the background where I was offering some kind of encouragement to some of our professionals that work for the council in this very difficult time when they have to put budget proposals forward. This workforce is under huge pressure, and a great tranche of talent had to leave this council very suddenly this month because of restrictions that the Conservative government put in, which meant that their decades of service to the council wasn't going to be recognised once they left, unless they left at that time. And the vacuum that has been left in the council's finances is not helped in terms of that forward planning which is necessary when the government refuses to even release what's for next year's spending before the end of November, never mind what the spending forecast looks like for the next 2 or 3 years. So if Councillor Carter wishes to guffaw at me actually offering anything helpful in a time of real stress for the authority, then fair enough. But the Liberal Democrat group have always been trying to be an enabling opposition as opposed to one that just searches for headlines. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Lewis, can I bring you in to draw this discussion to a conclusion, please?
Thank you, Leader. And again, listen very carefully to what Councillor Galton had to say. I mean, clearly, and fully understand why the opposition are reserving their position as we head towards having a full budget. There are reasons we're doing this. I think there is no getting away from the scale of reduction in council spending that is having to take place. We know there is a fiscal event coming up at the end of the month. I'm not sure whether we call it a budget or a spending announcement, but we'll find out how much money the government down there in London is going to give us for our services. And I think very much dependent on the content of that announcement and the amount of resource come forward, then we'll be able to come to a point where we can finally consider which of these proposals move forward, or if we are sufficiently funded, as we constantly request ourselves, and through organisations like the LGA, if we are sufficiently funded by central government, many of these proposals will disappear, and we'll have to wait to see what our funding settlement is to see where our final budget proposals are. I wish it was all in our hands to deal with this, but unfortunately it isn't, and like I say, we will put our final budget proposals together in light of the resource that comes from central government next week or the week after.
Thank you, Councillors, and I expect we will have more detail to bring to the next Executive Board in December on those announcements made towards the end of November. Thank you, everyone. With that, can I agree that we move the recommendations of the item 9 and move to item 10, please, Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Leader. This is a further paper around trying to resolve the council's financial position, and this is one focused on the council's estate and asset management, and trying to both see where we can release extra resources for the council through the release of assets and the long-term use of our estate moving forward. There is a number of items. I think in terms of introduction, I will run through them in terms of the order they're set out in terms of the recommendations. So in saying that, I'm just looking for the recommendations on the screen. So the first one is the continuing the accelerated disposal of property. Again, emphasis on the word accelerated, as we've discussed on previous papers. The need at speed to find resources for the council's budget position means that we are moving forward quickly with these. And I know on items we've agreed at previous exec board, we've had the yield has been higher than predicted in, when they've gone to auction, which suggests this can be a successful approach. And the one in this paper is a site in Beeston. I'll just note at this point, Councillor Blake, I think you've received correspondence from a head teacher of a neighbouring school this morning, and we will work through the content of that. The second is a disposal of properties from the council's investment portfolio. Again, these were properties that were bought to as part of the council's investment portfolio to make a return, and at this stage, having sought external advice, we believe now, actually, given the need to balance the council budget, now for these properties in the investment portfolio, the time is right to sell them. We will make more than we bought them for on these. These are properties in the logistics area, which we are advised has a high value given where the economy is at the moment. So we will put these on the market, as it said, look at the offers received. The third item is Abbey Mills in Kirkstall. We've done a piece of work with the Kirkstall Valley Development Trust, and they got a grant from Homes England to look at the possibility of bringing this premises into use as, I suppose, as you'd loosely describe, as a community-led housing project. However, the feasibility work has been carried out, and they don't believe they can move this forward. So we are looking at disposing of the property. Again, just to note at this stage, Councillor John Illingworth from Kirkstall Ward has written to me with some further comments on this and some further suggestions. So we'll be working through those. The third is about the estate rationalisation, which is vacating existing council properties. As I think Councillor Galton raised on one of the earlier items there, as part of the council overall budget, regretfully, and I do say that we have staff leaving at the moment, and predict more staff will be moving out over time. We have seen changes in working practices since the pandemic came in, and therefore we need less property to work out of in the future, and that is set out as item 4. Item 5, again, it is properties that we will, they're in the confidential appendix, but they're properties we will bring forward in the future to start the work of consultation, and obviously they will come forward in a public forum should we choose to dispose of them. And then item 6 is noting that the Director of City Development will be following these through. Like I say, Leader, I thought I'd work through each of the recommendations in turn by way of introduction, because there is a number of items in these papers which are part of the overall approach to balancing the budget. I think, again, we've talked about the scale of the funding reduction. We've talked about the scale of the staff leaving the organisation. Now we're talking about the scale of the council's land ownership in the city. And I think it all comes to underline just actually what the impact, having gone through 10 years of austerity budget reductions, what actually impact of both this year's and the impact of COVID has on the council's operations. And we can't underestimate that, or the scale of changes that are going to be needed to keep the council moving forward and delivering on our priorities in the future with a much reduced budget position.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Carter.
Yes, Chair. I mean, the major item on here, as well as the principle, is the second bullet point in the recommendations, and for obvious reasons, this is the most substantial. And I'll reserve my comments for the confidential papers, because there's a lot of confidential commercial information there that clearly shouldn't be shared. I am not in principle opposed to accelerating disposal of properties, and never have been, and I'm not opposed either to using the means of option for smaller properties, certainly. However, it is essential, I repeat again, I had this discussion with Mr. Farrington earlier this week, that ward members are consulted at an early stage, and if possible, their support is garnered. And that is not happening across the piece. I had serious complaints from two of my members who first heard of one of these properties being disposed of via a third or even a fourth party. And that's not acceptable. Ward members are key to a successful rationalisation of the estate. They won't always agree, nor should they. It's up to them to fight the corner for their constituents. But on many occasions, they will agree, because they know full well what the financial situation is and are realistic about that. But I do want some assurance, and I'm not going to make specific comments here, but the director knows, and I just want some reassurance that this sort of omission, which is actually quite insulting to ward members, is not going to continually happen. And that even on a very confidential basis, they should be engaged in the discussion at its outset and not at its tail end. And I would like some reassurance on that. And I'll talk about the individual proposals on the pink papers, of which I'm broadly supportive, let me tell you. Can I just say that I find it interesting that a deal that the council did, which is now referred to here in terms of these industrial properties, commercial properties, call them what you will, proved to be a very successful one in the light of the current situation. And as parts of the property market have been badly hit, other parts have not been badly hit. Indeed, the reverse could be the case. So I do think that the decision that was made initially in connection with Logic Leeds has been absolutely underlined as being a very sensible one, despite the opposition, I think, seem to remember, of Councillor Galton. However, there is one point to remember. Again, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And some of these properties pay into a revenue stream a substantial amount of money, which once disposed of will not be available to support the council's revenue spending. So whilst the principle is correct, we must keep an eye on the fact that we cannot indefinitely dispose of everything that has a revenue stream, or we just put more and more pressure on day-to-day spending.
Okay, thank you. Martin, I'm sure you're able to come back and reassure Councillor Carter that member engagement is paramount and that any omissions will be dealt with seriously.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Blake. Yeah, I mean, Councillor Carter and I have discussed the points that he raised, and I'm happy to have a further discussion with him on the detail and the general position in terms of consultation. Ward members are consulted in terms of disposal processes that we bring forward, and it's very important that that happens. I think the instance that Councillor Carter is raising in this specific case relates to those properties that are in the confidential appendix as properties that we're evaluating as to whether we come out of. So it's work that's not in the public domain at this time, and so the council hasn't made any decision at this point. But I'll have a conversation with Councillor Carter about timing of consultation in those instances to make sure that we can address his concerns.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galton, do you want to comment?
Oh yes, please, Chair. Thank you for Councillor Carter introducing the issue around the industrial units, because he is correct. The Liberal Democrat group did oppose the arrangements at that site. It wasn't so much that the council should buy commercial property and through that way provide an income stream for the council to deliver public services. That's something we're very relaxed about. One of the things that we weren't very relaxed about, and in terms of opposition parties propping up the administration and patting them on the back, I seem to remember the Conservatives did a pretty good show of that when we were discussing one of the tenants of these properties, and that is Amazon. And one of the reasons why we were not comfortable with the arrangement at Logic was the fact that we had an organisation which had been heavily criticised by unions, for instance, that sponsored many of the councillors that form part of the administration. And yet the council was going to have this company and its questionable employment practices trading under its roof. And we thought that put us in a compromised position when we were meant to be the chief protagonist in the city for the concept of inclusive growth. So I think it's with some relief that potentially Councillor Lewis is looking forward to the potential loss of such assets within the council's portfolio, because it will stop people like me reminding them that actions speak louder than words. And throughout the relationship we've had as the landlord of Amazon at this site, I don't think they've particularly been very, very inclusive in terms of its participation in the wider partnership strategy of the council. But I look forward to being proved otherwise. But I'm not sure, for instance, they've become one of our child-friendly ambassadors. But Councillor Venner might be able to correct me on that one. So yes, I look forward, hopefully, to the council ending that particular unfortunate relationship. And thank you for reminding me, Councillor Carter.
Councillor Lewis, do you want to come back?
Can I thank Councillor Galton for biting on the end of my hook yet again?
Thank you, and Leader, you know, in their 5 years of government together, they were so close as well. It's sad to see them falling out. Sad to see them falling out like this. I think, you know, I feel this will be the last time for me to remind Councillor Galton that the council isn't a regulator of labour market standards. And the labour market standards and workplace regulations are in place, are those that are in place during his 5 years in government, that in that period he did nothing to amend when he was in government. I don't take actually any relief in this position. I think, and again I will join Councillor Carter in praising officers in asset management for putting us in a position where we are able to have assets that are give us options rather than giving us problems in terms of their contribution to the council's financial strategy. Again, you know, the terms of the investment portfolio, it did give us an income for the council, but as I've referred to on my previous papers, we are in a position where we are taking decisions that we would not want to take, but we have to take in order to balance the council's book. And quite clearly, our role in the Aire Valley Enterprise Zone has been a positive one in terms of encouraging employment there. We've done that in a number of ways, including through our own portfolio. And like I say, this gives us options in terms of releasing cash from some very good investments to support the council's budget strategy. And I'll leave it there, Leader.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, can we approve the recommendations of item 10? And can I thank Councillor Lewis for all the work that he's doing on this area as well. It's an intense period we're going through right now. So thank you for that. Can I move on to Councillor Mulheron's portfolio now, please? Item 11.
Thank you, Leader. As we all know, City Square is one of the key gateways to the city, the arrival point for workers, visitors to the city, local residents coming into the city, particularly by train. And this report sets out the ambition to make the City Square much more pedestrian friendly, to take out through traffic, and to create a much more welcoming gateway entrance point to the city for all those who are visiting. It will also improve the air quality in the area. As we know, it sits right alongside one of the key areas of concern for air quality that we previously were taking action on. And the report then sets out to approve the REBA-led design competition for the future design of the public space in City Square. We brought a report to Executive Board, which we met under the first of these Zoom, Skype type meetings in March this year. And we agreed that we would bring a further report back to present the design principles and the way in which the process would be taken forward. So the competition went out in September, and set out in the report today is the text that's being used for the design brief for REBA, and the way in which we will take that forward, and also the fact that it will come back to Executive Board for endorsements of the outcome of this competition in spring next year.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carter.
Yes, thank you. I wonder if I can have some reassurance from Councillor Mulheron on this. At what stage will the public be consulted on the final design? Because reading this paper, and I may have read it incorrectly, so please tell me if that's the case, but it seems to me that what we're doing here is we are going out to pick a company to produce the final design. When that final design is submitted to the council, if we agree it will go to the planning committee. Now, I'd like to know at what stage pre-planning the general public have an opportunity to make meaningful comments which can be taken on board. City Square is, for many people, the centre of the city. It is what it is. It has been for many, many years. Everyone recognises it. And I would like to know how we propose to consult. And the other point on it is, has any funding been allocated for this scheme? And if so, where from and how much?
Councillor Mulheron, do you want to come back, or should I bring Martin in or Jane in?
I'm happy to start to come back, but officers could add to what my comments. So within the report, it does set out that public engagement had been intended originally to take place at an earlier stage in the process, but that they will now take place once the concept design stage is complete. Just so that they were confident that the scheme that then is put out to public consultation is both buildable in technical terms and meets all the requirements in terms of the ground and the water, etc. But also that it's affordable within the funding package that we have available to deliver.
Okay, Martin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Yeah, just building on the comments that Councillor Mulheron has said. In 4.1.4 of the paper, it outlines that public engagement will be undertaken at the end of REBA stage 2. So in planning terms, a planning application normally comes, Councillor Carter, at the end of REBA stage 3. So that will provide an interim position pre-planning for the concept of the proposal, as Councillor Mulheron correctly outlines, to be subject to a consultation process in terms of public engagement. On the resources side, as the paper outlines, there is £500,000 in the capital programme that members have approved for the feasibility development of this scheme. The REBA competition is forecast to cost about 238,000. Just as a comparison, to get to a REBA stage 3, you would normally expect to spend about 5% of the forecast cost. So the forecast cost for the scheme is about 5 million that was in the MOU. So that would be 250,000. So the 238,000 to run the competition in that respect affords value for money.
That's very helpful, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Galton, do you want to comment on this paper?
Yes, please, Chair. I'm going to be reserving my position on it, only because of the discussions that we had earlier around the budget setting paper and how very difficult decisions are being made in so many departments. And I'm just wondering if I was part of an administration right now, I'd be very nervous about bringing forward this kind of paper, which focuses on yet another city centre scheme in the midst of a pandemic. I'm aware that the original paper came forward in March, and this is just following a timetable that was set then. But March was a long time ago in terms of council finances and priorities. And I just wonder, did anybody consider freezing this development going forward, given that it might be £500,000 that might be needed somewhere else, and actually a year's delay wouldn't make that much difference?
Councillor Mulheron, I don't know if you want to respond to that in terms of the overall strategy for the city or not.
So I think key points really are, if we're going to be considering in the next report connecting Leeds strategy and progress in terms of the work we're doing to improve public transport provision and also active travel, and alongside that then the need to be able to route other traffic around the city. This sits right at the heart of a number of schemes that we have underway, which we'll be considering under the next item. So obviously work that's underway now and on Infirmary Street, Park Row, the Corn Exchange, and the work that's already taken place along the hedgerow, and work that is yet to take place at Army Gyratory. All of that is essential, both to reroute vehicles out of the city centre to make our air quality better and to improve walking and cycling links in the city, all of which we know is very important for the ability of people to live healthy lives and to be able to improve their quality for respiratory function, which we know is very, very important now, particularly in light of the current pandemic. Alongside that, we have our ambitions to be net zero by 2030. So to meet our own climate ambitions as well, we need to be able to ensure that people have fully functioning alternatives to using the private car. And that does enable us then to have a better public transport system and active travel routes in and out of the city centre. So it's not just a scheme that is designed to create a nice public space, although it's connected to all of the other strategies that we have in terms of inclusive growth. With the City Square is surrounded by key landmark buildings at the heart of the city and very important businesses. We've of course got the Channel 4 headquarters that's just relocated to the Majestics building right there in the heart of the city centre. And if you look at the way in which the city is being transformed through our inclusive growth work and our ambitions to be net zero by 2030, the work at City Square is not something that's a nice option to have. It is really essential to achieving that those goals across inclusive growth, climate emergency and health and well-being, as well as creating a space that's much more child-friendly and age-friendly as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we agree the recommendations to that paper? And as you say, you've got to follow up another paper under item 12 as well. If we could move on to that.
Reserve.
Sorry, was that for item 11, Councillor Carter? Or was that Councillor Carter that made that comment?
It was.
Was that for item 11 or 12? Councillor Carter.
Sorry, 11.
You're reserving your position on item 11?
Yep.
Okay. Item 12 then, please.
Thank you. So item 12 sets out an update for Executive Board on the Connecting Leeds work that we've been undertaking. As members know, £173.5 million was secured following the government cancellation of the trolleybus scheme to improve Leeds public transport investments. Connecting Leeds was established to deliver transformational change in public transport infrastructure and more recently in terms of walking and cycling measures for the city. And we were given 4 years to develop, design and deliver schemes within that original funding package. The report sets out the measures that have taken place already, and members will be very well aware of the park and ride schemes, which certainly pre-COVID were very, very successful, so successful that the two that were up and running have since had to be expanded. Work is being ongoing in terms of the Sturton Park and Ride scheme, which will be the first renewable energy driven park and ride scheme with electric buses being provided to serve that route. And of course, we touched upon some of the other gateway schemes in the previous item. So the work along the hedgerow, along Infirmary Street, along the Corn Exchange, and so on. So linking our public transport infrastructure across the city in a way that makes it much more reliable and therefore attractive to the public to use. It's also enabled us to develop a number of new rail station schemes, not enough to deliver them, but to develop them for future delivery, and has created new bus stop infrastructure across the city with real-time information, again, to make public transport use much more attractive to the travelling public. Set out in the report is also very clearly identified the carbon savings, so the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over 60 years as a result of the mode shift that this report is intended, that this work is intended to deliver, is 15,947 tonnes of CO2 equivalents, which is equivalent to over £5 million of carbon savings and 13.4 million car trips. And the scheme was over-programmed from the start. We wanted to make sure that we made full use of the funding that was available. And we now as set out in the report, have schemes over and above those that we can deliver in the time available, which will mean that we have a number of shovel-ready schemes which we will be able to take forward as and when further government funding allows.
Thank you. Councillor Carter.
Yes, thank you. A number of points on this, really. And we have had, I think, a little bit of leeway from the government in terms of they've softened their approach slightly to say that where we're about to let contracts, it can be extended through into the next financial year. I'd like confirmation of that, please. And then I want to go back actually to, and you'll be delighted to know that on this, probably for the different reasons, Councillor Galton and I agree. It concerns me that, and I've said this at the WICA board as well, that far too many schemes have remained totally unamended, or even worse, have not been properly economically evaluated in the light of COVID. And I was disappointed to hear that throughout Councillor Mulherrin's comments, she never mentioned the retail sector, or I didn't hear it, and all those many people employed in the retail sector who will be desperate to see the return of footfall into the city centre, and that it will take some considerable time for the retail sector to recover. And I would like to think I can have reassurance that the economic impact on the retail sector has been properly evaluated since the outbreak of COVID against some of these schemes, because it's right that we're in a difficult position, and we want to ensure that we do nothing that makes the difficulties in the retail and hospitality sectors worse than they are already and will continue to be. And nowhere in these reports, and indeed the reports that go to WICA, that again, Councillor Galton and I both get, does it mention in any detail where schemes have been re-evaluated in the light of the economic impact of COVID on city centres, in particular Leeds. And the final point, which is a very specific one, the A647 cycleway between Leeds and Bradford, part of City Connect, overspent by £3.5 million. There was an argument between Leeds and WICA, with Leeds asserting that WICA had always said they would underwrite any additional costs. That didn't happen. I would like telling how, and I think the public deserve to know, how that difference has now been reconciled, if it has. Otherwise, we are left with a £3.5 million overspend on that scheme alone, that section of that scheme alone.
Okay, some quite specific questions there. Martin or Gary, would you like to pick them up, please?
Thank you, Councillor Blake. Perhaps if I ask Gary to pick up the specifics in terms of contractual position with DFT funding and the COVID-related elements, and then I can pick up the question on the City Connect overspend. Gary?
Thank you, Martin. Certainly on the contracts side of things, yes, to begin with, DFT were very clear that every bit of the funding had to be spent by the end of March 2021. I have to say, I think that was pretty unrealistic at that point in time, just because of the sheer amount of money and where schemes were. And over time, there's been good dialogue with DFT, and we're now in a position where it's agreed that provided schemes are in contract by the end of March 21, then the funding will be available the following year and work can continue. So that was made probably about 2 years or so ago now, and that's really helped. It's eased the pressure somewhat, but there is still huge pressure to deliver such a major programme of works in a very short space of time. The COVID-19 one, that's an interesting one, because the assurance processes that we're following have obviously been set in train for a number of years, and we're trying to deal with the impact of COVID-19. So probably it is fair to say what Councillor Carter has said there, and that will be something that will have to be developed over the next few months. Many of these schemes are a long way through the process and nearing completion, and in terms of getting approval through the system, and so to go back now, I think would jeopardise their delivery in certain timeframes. Having said that, also though, I think much of what we're doing will actually very much help the situation as the economy comes out of COVID-19 and as things start to improve and gets back to normal, hopefully next year. What we're about here, all the reasons that Councillor Mulherrin said, but also about obviously providing real choice for people, from walking, cycling, public transport, and obviously still retaining access for people who need to use their car too. So I think there is a positive story to be had there, but in terms of an analytical approach to that, I think that's something that we need to develop. Martin, do you want to come back on the A647 one? Do you want to cover that one?
Martin?
Yeah, no, I can do. So, I mean, Councillor Carter, you're referring to a disagreement between the council and the combined authority on assurances that Leeds City Council feel it was given with regard to the spend on that. The current position is that the council is working with the combined authority, where we've agreed the principle of sale of land from Leeds City Council to the combined authority on Manston Lane. And that land is to facilitate a park and ride facility for the rail halt for the Thorpe Park station that the combined authority are leading on. So that would create a windfall receipt for the council.
Councillor Carter?
Yes, thank you. Comment on both the answers, really. Well, I appreciate the fact that some of the major highway public realm schemes are well under construction, but a lot are not. And I've not really received any assurance, indeed I haven't received any assurance, that we are looking at the economic impact of the schemes not yet started on things like retail and hospitality in the city centre. That's really disappointing. It's a piece of urgently required work. On the A647, pardon me, but if we had an agreement with WICA, which they have reneged on, to meet our cost overruns, which now are about 3.5 million, and the resolution of that is to sell them one of our capital assets for that amount of money, and then say, we've been paid. It's the economics of the madhouse, because what we've done is to sell them an asset we could have sold to somebody else anyway, so that they can say, and we can say, they've met our costs. I'm sorry, it is indeed the economics of the madhouse, because we have effectively given away an asset we could have used to sell to another person at another time. Nobody is going to swallow that as getting our £3.5 million back.
I don't know if you want to come back, Martin, but I'm sure these are conversations that are...
Just to clarify, Leader, the land in question is land that would be needed for the park and ride, so it would be used for a park and ride in any event. It's not a piece of land that the council would look to sell separate to the rail halt. So rather than provide it on a less than best basis to the combined authority, the council has agreed to sell it at market value to recover receipts that it otherwise would not have had.
Okay, thank you. Can I bring Councillor Galton in, please?
Thanks, Chair. I'm afraid this is going to be another paper that I'm reserving my position on. I was a little bit overcome by how relaxed people were to this paper when I got briefed on it, because as far as I'm concerned, it's a litany of failure in a great part, and I think at the centre of it is a real paucity of oversight of the Highways Department and its performance and delivery. I wrote to Councillor Mulherrin in February last year, after I was very concerned with correspondence I'd had with Highways officers about the level of work they were expected to process on a team which was significantly understaffed. And this paper seems to be the balance sheet for the lack of investment that was overlooked then, and my concerns were dismissed. There is a huge amount of over-programming that's outlined in this paper. It isn't just a certain amount, it's a huge amount. And when this council announced its amazing settlement from the government, after we'd been messed around over Supertram and NGT, and we had 174 million quid, and we listed all the things that were going to be coming out of it, the public out there got quite excited, and understandably so, because it was made to be such a big thing. And they must be so deflated at the lack of delivery under the timescale that was set for the Leeds Integrated Transport Plan to deliver. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been renamed as Connecting Leeds, and then other bits have been added onto it. The delivery of all of these proposals has been reliant upon windfall opportunities like the government's shovel-ready schemes programme, and basically unquestioned access to the West Yorkshire Transport Fund to make up for the spending deficits or overspends or whatever on our own programme. And I don't see any kind of transparent or thought out prioritisation programme in terms of the schemes which will go forward and the schemes which end up going on the back burner or ultimately become rejected. And especially on the rail aspect of the integrated transport plan, it doesn't feel like there's actually going to be anything delivered after millions of pounds have been spent on professional services. I am really concerned about this, and I'm not sure what kind of response I'm going to get back from Councillor Mulherrin, because even when she was talking about the City Square earlier, she was talking about how this council takes its air quality seriously, you know, a month after it's shrugged its shoulders when the clean air zone got cancelled. It's all right saying we've delivered this amount of carbon and we've solved this and we're serious about integrated transport and active travel. It's in the delivery that you will be judged, and this paper is a list of failure. Over to you, Councillor Mulherrin, via the chair, obviously.
Gary, do you want to come back at all before I bring Councillor Mulherrin in?
At the outset of this programme, which just remember, we identified, following a very extensive public consultation, a series of schemes, ideas at that time that hadn't been developed, and we'd only got approval from DFT in April 2017, and then the report came to the June Exec Board asking permission to move things on. And I have to say, on behalf of my team, the delivery partners and the development partners, that a huge amount of time and effort, and I'd say hard work, has gone into this programme. And table 1 in the report outlines the schemes that are completed already, the schemes that are on site, schemes where we have managed to secure additional funding into the programme as well, which will bring more benefits. So rather than seeing it as a failure, as Councillor Galton has referred to it, I see it as a major achievement by a team of people that are working on a whole range of other initiatives and programmes for the council, and I would pay tribute to them. We set out to make sure that we would deliver a wide range of outline business cases. That's what we said to begin with the number of those then taking forward into implementation. We didn't say at the outset that we would deliver everything. The key thing was to make sure that we spent up the 174 million, because as Councillor Carter covered in his question, at the outset, DFT made it very clear to Leeds City Council that if we didn't spend it by March 2021, the money would be taken away. We wouldn't receive the money. That was the starting point. But then working together with colleagues at the Combined Authority and with our partners, we've moved it into a position where we've got a little bit longer to enable us to move this programme forward. And the public consultation was very well received, involved tens of thousands of people. And as I say, in table 1, a lot is being delivered. And if people have been to Leeds now, you will see the amount of work that's taking place in the city centre on many of these schemes. So I'm sorry, Leader, I'm very passionate and enthusiastic about this programme, just because the effort on behalf of the team that have gone into this. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Councillor Harron, I'm sure you'll come in on similar lines.
Thank you. I'd just really say I think Gary has kind of covered the response I was going to make, perhaps more politely than I was going to make it. And I really, the fluff and bluster in Councillor Galton's comments probably made, to cover his next leaflet or Facebook post, doesn't really do justice to the work that has been done by officers of this council and the partners that have been out as key workers, delivering schemes throughout the whole of the pandemic on site, trying to do the work that they do socially distanced in a safe manner to deliver schemes for the people of this city so that they can get back to work when we come out on the other side of this in a safe way and in a way that actually enables them to take public transport and other methods of getting in and out of their workplace safely, and to use all of the other fantastic facilities that we have in the centre of Leeds. So I just really endorse the comments that Gary's just made. Thank you to the team.
Thank you, Councillor Harron. Can I ask us to approve the recommendations and note? I think that both Councillor Carter and Councillor Galton are reserving their position on this. Thank you very much for those updates. Can we move on then to the next portfolio item? Councillor Pryor, please.
Thank you, Leader. So this is an update paper on exclusions and elective home education on the report from last September. I think it's important to note at this stage and actually thank Councillor Lamb's scrutiny board, who are actually in the middle of a full inquiry into kind of exclusions, full-time exclusions, part-time exclusions, elective home education and off-rolling. That has been paused slightly due to COVID, and I think is due to resume in the new year. So obviously a lot of the things in this are ongoing. On exclusions, so obviously these were paused between March and June this year due to the pandemic, but I can say that in the 18 to 19 academic year, there were 11 permanent exclusions across the city. This is at a rate of 0.02, which is increased slightly from the previous year to that, which was 0.01, but it is important to note that both of these are significantly below the national rate of 0.2. And actually, we are lower than all of our comparators, and we had no permanent exclusions from special schools. We are, however, as a city, slightly above the national average for fixed-term exclusions, but we do remain below our comparators on that, just to kind of let members know exactly where we sit in the country. And I know actually the rate of fixed term exclusions was something which was or has been of particular interest to the scrutiny board when they have taken papers on this in the past. On elective home education, there has been quite a significant uptick in notifications of this since the start of the new academic year. Notifications in all year groups, but specifically or significantly in key stages 1 and 2. The most frequent reason for this given has been COVID. So we are kind of working through these numbers, and potentially next year, we're not sure yet kind of when life gradually returns back to normal. There's a chance we may see these children being electively home educated want to return to mainstream education, but obviously that remains to be seen. I think it's worth saying that last year the Children's Commissioner produced a report which was called Skipping School: How Children Disappear from England's Schools. And that's to highlight the many ways in which children came off the roll of schools in a variety of ways, kind of other than exclusions. And it highlighted that while some parents do make a positive philosophical choice to educate their children and do an excellent job, it's not always the case. And this is obviously quite a difficult topic, which is still ongoing. We saw last year how sadly some schools do kind of use other options other than exclusions to kind of move children off roll. The government is yet to act on the Children's Commissioner's report. And we know that this is something that Ofsted is starting to look at and take a lot more seriously. And obviously we're looking at it at a local level. I'll leave it there for now in terms of introductory comments, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Councillor Carter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one really, as Councillor Pratt said, there's an ongoing scrutiny inquiry, which will, I think, drill fairly thoroughly down into all these statistics. But there's just one I wanted to query, and that's on primary exclusions, which are alarmingly rising. And we've gone from, there's some banding apparently on this, and we've gone from band A to band D, which indicates to me a worsening in the situation. Is there any light Councillor Pryor can shed on that, please?
Councillor Pryor, do you want me to bring in Sal? Or
Please, I'm just scrolling through to try and find the bit of the report.
or Val, perhaps, whoever, Val or Sal?
Sorry, just a correction there, Councillor Carter. It's from band A to band B. Primary
not band D.
exclusions,
Okay,
so they
thank you.
It's band B. It's A to B, and it is only a very small increase. It's only increased by 0.05%.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Good. That's good clarification. Thank you. Councillor Galton, do you have any comments to make?
No questions, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll get an update when we know the results of the scrutiny inquiry. It's on there. Can we approve the recommendations of the report?
Yeah.
Councillor Pryor?
Sorry, it froze out on my computer for a second then.
Oh, sorry. Can we move on to your next paper, please?
Yes, yeah, of course. So the next paper is the Equalities Improvement Priorities Report. So this report sets out the annual progress against the Council's equality improvement priorities for 2018 to 2022. It outlines the reviewed, amended and completed priorities across the entire Council in all directorates. And these are both to meet the legal duties under the 2010 Equality Act, but also fits in with the Council's wider ambition to be the best city in the UK, compassionate and caring, but with a strong economy. So within the report, it's quite a thorough and long report, which goes into a huge amount of detail. But it starts with kind of a demographic breakdown of the city. We cover things such as the work that Adults and Health Directorate are doing with older LGBT communities, work on Windrush, Black Lives Matter, then through to reducing fuel poverty, being a living wage employer, and also to Leeds being a city of sanctuary and taking in refugees fleeing some of the truly horrific circumstances they're coming from. And obviously Councillor Cooper had a full report on that last exec board. As I say, it's such a massive report. I'll leave it there for introductory remarks, but happy to go wherever questions do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carter.
No comment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galton.
Only a small one, Chair, and it was to say, obviously, as one of the council's quality champions, I'm well aware of the priorities that the individual departments are offering, but sometimes issues come up with councillors' casework, for instance, where an unintended bias or discrimination occurs. And I've already let the department know, but I think one of the things that's become apparent to me as a councillor is how we have yet to respond, for instance, to the younger disabled population and what their needs are. We're very good at looking after our elderly disabled, and we have excellent commission services for adults with learning disabilities. But I think it's one of those areas where we might need to have a refocus, and the different departments have a look at where cross-departmentally they can create a better outcome.
Okay, Councillor Pryor, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, so there's the section in the report on the children's services improvement priorities, and actually kind of not in this paper, but referring back to the annual standards report. We've been looking at specifically reducing some of the gaps in learning outcomes for vulnerable learners. With Key Stage 2 children with SEND, from memory, we'd increased, I think, by 2% some of the reading, writing and maths results there. So we are making progress. There's still a gap between kind of disadvantaged children and non-disadvantaged children. But I know on Progress 8 for disadvantaged children, we do outperform the rest of the country. We are above the country on that measure. But I mean, that's not to say that there's not more work to be done. There are some particular items in the report about specific disabilities. So, for example, improving access to council services for deaf people, for example. But I guess that's the nature of disabilities. It's quite difficult to treat it as one homogenous block. The kind of people with different disabilities require quite different things. Because this report is looking backwards, it doesn't have a huge amount on kind of the specific effects of COVID. We know that COVID is going to disproportionately affect all people with disabilities, including children with disabilities. So no, that is something we are looking at going forward. But obviously, if Councillor Galton's got a specific issue in mind, I'm more than happy to address that, or a specific disability, because of how you kind of mitigate each one is quite different.
Okay, do you want to come back, Councillor Galton? Are you satisfied with the response?
I wasn't as clear as I could have been. I was talking more about younger adults as opposed to those looked after by children's services, because I do recognise that children's services have a very good record in terms of looking after our younger young people. It's when people get into adulthood that sometimes the challenges appear. But as I said, I'm happy to work through that outside of this meeting, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Can we approve the recommendations of the report? And move on to Councillor Charlwood, please, item 15.
Thank you, Leader. I think my internet may be a bit unstable, so if you can't hear me, tell me somehow.
We can hear you okay at the moment.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Galton, I can pick that up with you outside the meeting as well, if you like, about the younger disabled adults. So this item is the National Flu Immunisation Programme 2020-2021, and it's bringing an update about the Public Health Department's work on this very important issue this year, because obviously due to the risk of flu and COVID co-circulating this winter together, the flu immunisation programme is much more important than usual in to protect vulnerable people and to support resilience of the health and care system, to avoid overburdening our NHS when it's trying to deal with high levels of COVID infection. And obviously we wouldn't want people to have COVID and flu at the same time. So this year's flu vaccination eligibility criteria has been expanded. We expect to immunise over half of the city's population, which for a city of around 800,000 people is a lot of people. We have 150 to 200,000 vaccinations for the existing eligible cohort that usually is eligible. And this year we have an additional 240 to 280,000 vaccines for the new cohorts, new groups of people. So the aim is to achieve a minimum uptake of around 75% across all of our eligible groups and 100% offer to all frontline health and social care workers, as you would expect. Good progress has been made across the city on increasing uptake, with about 75% of the over 65s having received the vaccine already. All other eligible groups have increased their uptake rates compared to this time last year, but there's more work to do. And obviously this is really excellent because of the difficulties and challenges facing our health system at the moment. So that's great news, I think. So planning and delivering the programme is much more challenging this year just because of primary care and the COVID safe environments, social care services, the need for social distancing measures, uncertainties around staff absences. So immunisers have been focusing on achieving maximum uptake of the flu vaccine for eligible groups. So we're hoping also to take lessons from this approach to the rollout of any COVID vaccine that comes available. So we're taking learning and leadership learning from this rollout, and that will inform the COVID vaccination plan, which will be really challenging. So we need to try and hit the ground running with that. So we're obviously already really engaged with that. So the groups that we are trying to work with are all those aged 65 and over. We want to get 75% at least of those. As we said, we've already got in that group. Under 65 clinical at-risk groups, we want to also target pregnant women, all children aged 2 to 10, long-stay residential care home residents, carers, close contacts of immunocompromised individuals, frontline health and care workers. But also we're going to try to offer the vaccination to everyone between 50 to 64 years as well, which is a new group, following prioritisation of other eligible groups and subject to the vaccine supply. So we need to make sure we have enough vaccine, but if we manage to get through enough of the earlier groups that I mentioned, then we'll be also offering it to those groups as well. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carter, any comments on this?
Yes, I thank Councillor Charwood for that very thorough introduction. Clearly, a very concerning area at the moment, given the COVID situation. I just hope that we can get these levels of uptake when the COVID vaccinations, put in the plural, become available. I'm sure a lot of us are extremely concerned at some of the quite appalling online messaging there is going on about from people who seem to be totally opposed to vaccinations. They're doing us all a very great disservice, and I think we wait to see what the government intends to do about trying to effectively combat some of that disinformation. We're in a very dangerous time, and we have to, I think, to send out a singular message, and this paper, certainly as regards flu immunisation, does that, so I'm happy to support it, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Galton.
No questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll probably come back to talk about vaccinations actually further, and item 18. Can we agree the recommendations of the paper? Thank you for the update, and move on to Councillor Rafiq, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report is about the replacement depot and the operational centre for environmental services. The current waste management facilities at Henshaw and Nostok Way are not suited to meeting the long-term needs of the council's operational requirements. current depots don't have the capacity to deal with the waste management safely, don't allow for changes to service or provisions such as extra collections, and aren't the most efficient location to operate from due to the location of the RERF. The funding was approved to deliver the depot by Executive Board at New Market Approach, which is adjacent to the RERF in 2017. The report details, Chair, that since then a new design has been developed that takes into account a capacity, operational requirements and asset rationalization opportunities. The design offers flexible, high quality working environment and an eco-friendly building, which will minimize the running costs, reduce the impact of carbon footprint. 4 million was approved back in 2017. We require another 5 million. So the report is about, as well as updating the board on the developments, is to seek a further 5.1 million, which will be funded through prudential borrowing. I'll stop there. I think the report is, fairly self-explanatory to take comments or questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carter.
Yes, a simple, very straightforward question. When's this going to happen? It seems to have been a very long-running saga. Decisions were taken some time ago, and we still don't seem to be anywhere near getting cracking. What's holding it up? Because you mentioned the prudential borrowing, but I'll mention the fact that there are capital receipts available too from the sites that we vacate. So could somebody please tell me when we're likely to see some action on this?
James, do you want to comment?
I can do, by all means, Chair. Councillor Carter, if you look at paragraph 3.21 of the report, that gives you the key milestones that we now expect to be in place, subject to Executive Board's agreement today. And you'll see from there that we anticipate the main contract award being made in January 2021 and actually start on site in February and therefore completion by December. So if we get the approval today, we can then get moving, and in a year's time, we'll have the new depot in place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, James. Sorry, do you want to come back, Andrew?
Yeah. Yes. So, Mr. Rogers, the key milestones are clearly set out there, and it does say underneath them all, subject to some relaxation of lockdown restrictions and market improvements. I understand that, and it's probably a very wise precautionary paragraph. But pardon me if I raise my eyebrows and say I hope that I can say well done in December of 2021. I suspect I will not be saying that. Okay, I'm sure you'll remind us of that fact if that's the case. I will. I'll be perfectly happy to say well done.
Thank you.
Take long enough.
Councillor Galton, do you want to comment on this report?
No questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can we agree the recommendations and move on to item 17, please, Councillor Cooper?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. This paper on item 17 today is asking Executive Board to endorse the principles of Keep It Local. I think it'll be a really good addition to the work that we do in the city with the third sector. Many of our third sector organisations are already members of the Keep It Local under the national charity of locality. It creates a wider network for us to help develop some of our well-known pieces of work that we've been doing over a number of years now. There is some good examples of what Leeds has done in the city, and that's under 3.3 in the report. If people want to take a look at the detail, please do so. But I'm really pleased to try and add this to the portfolio of what we're doing in the city with our third sector. I'll leave it there by way of introduction, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carter.
Not at the moment, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galton.
No comments, Chair.
Okay, can we agree the recommendations, approve the recommendations of the report? Thank you, Councillor Cooper. That moves us on to item 18, which is the late report, giving us an update on the situation in its broadest context around COVID. I don't want to repeat everything that's in the paper. It's a very full report, as I'm sure you're aware, and I hope you have all been appreciating the update communications that we've been putting out with all of the changes that have been taking place. Of course, we're now just one day off the midpoint in the lockdown that came into force across England on November the 4th, was it? I think. So a huge amount of work continuing, covering all of the aspects that everyone would expect around the updates around testing, working with the government, obviously the financial situation, the business grant schemes that have come in as a result of going into the lockdown, the work with the universities in terms of preparing for students returning to their own communities and homes at the beginning of December, and many more items as well. I think fair to refer back to the paper on the flu vaccinations, and just to recognise that this week has been a significant week in terms of the announcements about the vaccinations and the success of the work that's been taking place across the world, to be honest. And obviously, one of the key factors for us is that we want to be in a position to take full advantage when the vaccines are available to us, so that we can start to roll them out and give protection as soon as we possibly can. One of the issues that we're not yet clear on is how we will come out of this current lockdown, and along with other local authorities across the country, we're working with government to seek clarification about what the next steps will be and what our place within those scenarios will actually be. But happy to leave it there. I don't know, Victoria, if there's anything else you'd like to add at this point.
Thanks, Councillor Blake. Well, only very briefly, as you've described, to highlight, we seem to be at the moment right at the point of some very kind of major processes that all need to kind of come together, and we need to make sense of that locally. So there is a huge push on testing, wider testing than we have at the moment, that's coming nationally, that we need to manage to give us the best outcomes locally. There's obviously the major challenge around the vaccine, as you've said, and the position around restrictions. We're even though we're halfway through that lockdown period, that the next 7 to 10 days will really be the time that we can see how much of an impact it's made. So that it does feel, I think we always say it's a pivotal moment, but this time feels potentially more crucial than ever. So yeah, just to reflect your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carter.
Yes, again, I'll be brief, because for elected members anyway, we've been through a lot of this, but there are some crucial issues here. I know officers in finance and city development are working extremely hard to finalise the discretionary packages of financial support for businesses. That is absolutely crucial, and the additional support that the government are providing for us is very much welcomed, but it's no good if it's sitting in our bank accounts or the council's bank account and not going out to the businesses that need it. And I know that officers are working very hard to get these discretionary funds up and running. The statutory one, of course, went live on the 9th of November and has been a big uptake already, which is good news. Just on vaccines, yes, absolutely good news that now 2, and I strongly suspect a 3rd anytime soon, will be announced. And I think it's right that the government have not put all their eggs in one basket. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. All their eggs in one basket and have spread the ordering across across various different consortiums. As regards the pivotal moment, it absolutely is. I think everyone is looking to what the figures indicate now over this next 10 days or so. We're only 2 weeks into the new lockdown, although it seems like an age. And I suppose my biggest concern, therefore, is our case is coming down sufficiently to get us into a tier that gives people half a chance to have some sort of a social life, some sort of a life, and businesses a chance to survive. And we're all in a position of waiting to see. We, as a council, we just have to go on doing everything that we can to suppress the spread of this dreadful disease and give the same message to all our citizens: stick to the rules, otherwise this will go on longer than is acceptable to anybody.
Thank you, Councillor Gasher. I don't think you asked for any more information on that point, but certainly those are the points that we will be continuing to work on, to monitor and to communicate when we have any more updates or information to put out. Councillor Galton, do you have any comments to make at this point?
Only one question, Chair. I know that we will be receiving some support from government for COVID costs, and that I think is associated, besides the business related support, also to enabling task and trace. But I just wondered if there was any other COVID response which was included, because I'm aware, for instance, that the enforcement of lockdown is as big an issue for local people as much as the clinical response aspect. And I know that our enforcement teams have been depleted somewhat by staff leaving through the tranche that was mentioned earlier in the meeting, but also staff that are isolating. And I just wondered if there was any particular concertation between the agencies and the police to try and coordinate on a smaller key team to overcome those staff shortages, to respond meaningfully when people do report particularly significant breaches of lockdown.
I think the other area, Victoria, perhaps we haven't touched on, is the way the money is coming in to support to give support to people who have to self-isolate, and all of the containment strategy as well. I don't know if you want to pick that up with a link to enforcement, whether Tom wants to come in on that.
I can start. I'm sure Tom and maybe others can add, particularly to the enforcement specifics. When we got the additional latest tranche of funding on the basis of a list of headings that came with a letter that was as a result of the Tier 3 restrictions negotiations. So even though Tier 3 didn't happen for us, we still had the additional funding based on kind of a range of issues that were agreed through that process. So it is, Councillor Galton, much broader than just the testing and tracing. It does include a line on increasing compliance and enforcement activity locally. So that's been the basis of on which we've been asked to look at local enhancements of that activity. So yes, it is on the list. I don't know if Tom or James wants to say any more on that.
To you, Chair, is that okay? Yeah, just to say, yeah, I mean, Victoria set it out well. We are working extremely closely with the police and across services to try and make sure that we get the response that we need from either businesses or from individuals. The grants programme of £500, we've paid out 422 of those, but we know there's much bigger demand, and we are still very concerned about compliance. All of those issues land on us from different parts of Whitehall at times, so we are working closely with the civil servants to try and get across that the approach to mass testing, the approach to local test and trace, to enforcement, to what will become a vaccination plan, all need to land together, and we need a sort of integrated and concerted approach from both locally, but also from a national level as well. So that's going to be I think the challenge, and communicating really clearly and engaging with the diverse communities across the city to make sure that people know what's required of them and when, whether that's getting a test, whether it's self-isolating when they have symptoms and after they've tested positive or they're in contact, or it's getting a vaccine probably twice within a month. So all of those issues, huge logistics around it all, but we're working very, very closely and utilising the money that's come down to support that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can I ask that we approve the recommendations of the report and look forward to further updates very soon. Thank you. Can we move now on to the last item on the agenda, which is the update on the EU Brexit strategy. If I could hand over to Tom just to give us an update from a national perspective, if you've got any intelligence that you want to share with us.
There's been obviously a bit of a hiatus in all this because the negotiations have reached the critical point. So things like the fishing debates, the competition rules for business, and the and subsidies, and the dispute resolution seem to be the key elements that we'll find out more in the next, I guess, 10 days or so. What happens next and whether we have a deal or not, and that will drive the I think the impact that it has on businesses and on the city. Obviously, if there's a deal, then it's much clearer, and there's a smoother transition. If there isn't, then it's going to be a challenge. We met business organisations recently across the different sectors and with the representative groups, and I think the feedback there was that probably like us, everybody's extremely busy and challenged by the COVID crisis, and that there isn't as much bandwidth, if you like, for dealing with Brexit as well, and that's going to be a challenge for small and larger businesses, I would say. It's probably quite sectoral though, so the supermarkets and the food industry report quite quite a lot of confidence in terms of being ready, and in a funny way, the pandemic has given them a dry run at their supply chains having challenges and demand increasing, and they're very complimentary about the engagement that they've had. On the other hand, other sectors are less confident, particularly manufacturers. Major concerns around the potential impact of border disruption, and particularly for just-in-time manufacturers, and and the uncertainty about whether there'll be tariffs or not. But there is some support that's gone into Wyker and the LEP, £81,000 to support businesses to prepare for the end of transition. The settlement scheme work continues. The ID check-ins back up and running at Merion, and has been from late October and continues through this second lockdown. The communities team are engaging with as many of those, you know, hard to reach groups as possible. We're working very closely with the NHS as well to make sure that we're linked up there. But as we stand, you know, I guess your guess is as good as mine about whether we get a deal or not. But we anticipate that with you know, with great anticipation, and we'll deal with things as they arise as ever.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carter, do you want to comment? Sorry, Councillor Carter, are you all right?
Yeah.
You don't want to comment? Oh, sorry. Okay, Councillor Galton, sorry, apologies.
I think I'll pass on this one as well, Leader. I'm not sure there's that much that we could add at this stage that will make much influence. Okay,
well, just to reassure you, we continue with the cross-party working group when we do get information. So can we approve the recommendation?
Excellent.
And I think that brings us to the end of the